So, good evening. Welcome. My name's Robert Buxton. I'm going to play some classical piano, some gospel. I think I'm going to alternate between the two and speak about the music a little bit as well. So, I'll start with some gospel, a familiar gospel tune with some improvisation. This is famous old hymn, What a Friend We Have in Jesus. And the story behind it, I think, is interesting. That Joseph Scriven wrote it in the mid or to late 1800s. He was living in Canada and his mother was living in Ireland. And he sent it to her to comfort her at that time. You couldn't just call someone up or use FaceTime or whatever at that time. So this was a way to feel, our world feels smaller now perhaps. So here's my version of What a Friend We Have in Jesus to start us off. to do some classical. I'm going to go back and forth between those two styles. I'm mainly a classical pianist, but all music, it's music. It's all music. Maybe it's all gospel. So, well, not all of it. So next I'm going to play the program I'm doing and have been doing for a while is sort of an odd theme, because for a long time I wanted to switch instruments to the violin, because I love the violin. I love the violinists of the past, like Yasha Heifetz and Yehudi Menuhin. But my wife, who's a pianist, also convinced me it's just too much trouble to relearn a whole new instrument. But my backup plan with what I'm doing now is to play violin music for the piano. There's arrangements out there, good arrangements. So the first piece is from the 1700s. This is a gavotte by a French composer named Gossec. Gossec was a contemporary of Mozart's. He wrote a lot of operas, and this is from an opera, Rosine. It's a dance. It's very funny to me because it has a hiccup. I'll show you what I mean. You'll hear the hiccup. It's just almost out of the blue. Right there. Yep. It's just, yeah. So, but this was written in the 1780s. It's right before the French Revolution happened. So it's that world, the powdered wigs, Versailles, Louis XVI, King Louis. And that world was soon to be gone. So it's from a different time and place, very different. Here's an arrangement of the songs. It's called Songs My Mother Taught Me by Dvorak. It's a vocal piece originally, but it's played a lot on violin. That's why I'm doing it. And the text is something like this. The text, if I were to sing, I don't sing, but it says, I recall the songs that my mother taught to me, and now I teach them to my children. It's a very beautiful text. Dvorak was a Czech composer in the late 19th century, and being from Central Eastern Europe, the music that he heard most was gypsy music. He loved gypsy folk music, and this has a gypsy character to it almost. So yeah, it's a famous melody, you might recognize it. Here is a piano arrangement of it. So here it is. Here's a more bubbly piece. This is called Guitar, like guitar, by Morris Moskowski, a Polish composer. We don't hear him so much nowadays. He was very popular 100 years ago or so. My theory is because his music is sort of upbeat and happy, and classical music doesn't like those things anymore. That's just my theory. So this is normally heard on the violin. Moskowski wrote it for piano, and then his buddy, Pablo de Sarasate, Spanish violinist, decided that it's, first of all, he said it sounds very Spanish, which was high praise coming from an actual guy from Spain. And he said it needs to be a violin piece. So Sarasate arranged it for violin, and that's normally what's done. But I'm going to play the original piano version. So you're going to hear like some imitation of Spanish flamenco music, because that strumming of the guitar. So here it is. It's almost like this style of music, you could call it salon music. A salon is like right here. And salon music and salon painting
some people think it's cheesy, but I don't think so. I think it's just, it has a sort of zest and humor to it, which, like I said, music doesn't always have to be heavy and depressing. So I'll play you some heavy and depressing stuff later, but let's have this for now. Flip a switch in my brain and go do another gospel tune. People ask me, why do you do classical and gospels? So my mother's from Russia, all right, so this immigrant from Russia, and she and her brother, my uncle who died recently, unfortunately, Boris, instilled classical music. They love classical. They don't play, neither of them, but just the whole appreciation of it. But my dad is a 9th, 10th generation Southern Virginian, and he was always kind of, I don't say bugging me, but he said, you play all that Beethoven, but what about Hank Williams Sr. and all of that? So I started playing that stuff, with him. So that's why you have both. The cultures aren't that different when you think about it. They both like to talk a lot, and tell long-winded stories. So here is a Southern gospel version of the famous hymn "In the Garden." I say this about the gospel that I do. I might not play it this way on a Sunday morning, but this is not a Sunday morning, so that's yeah. piano. I love the white piano, and you don't see that every day. And I also think in a way it sort of calls for the more Nashville sound. That's what I thought when I started. I thought, I'm going to make this, give it a little Nashville, not Nashville today maybe, but like 40, 50 years ago. So, all right, so here's a piece, a Russian piece. I was telling about my mom and my uncle. This is called Daisies by Sergei Rachmaninoff. He wrote it right before he left Russia. It was 1916, he wrote this piece. In 1917, the Russian Revolution happened and he and his family left to never return. And this happened with my mother and her brother and their mom, my grandmother. They left in 1980, never visited, never went back. Similar. So, Rachmaninoff was a guy who was, you could say, plagued with nostalgia. Even when he was still in Russia, he may have been depressed, we might say that today. Let me tell you a story about him real quick. My grandfather, my father's father, my American grandfather, met Rachmaninoff in Richmond, Virginia in the 1930s. True story. He was an usher at a recital series, and Rachmaninoff was playing it. And my grandfather was told not to let anyone through the backstage doors. Well, somebody tried to open the door, and my grandfather pushed back. The person pushed ahead, and there was this little struggle. And boom, the door was kicked open. 6.5 foot tall Rachmaninoff with a shaved head. He never smiled. He was someone said he looked like an escaped convict. Yeah. And he spoke to my grandfather 5 words. You know what he said? Get out of my way. Because I have this great personal connection with them both. But this piece, Daisies, to me, it's about his childhood memories of being in the countryside with his grandmother. Those are the happiest moments of his life. So here it is. Daisies by Rachmaninoff. Here's a piece that's very sophisticated sounding, and I just learned it recently. So, by the way, these are all arrangements usually played on violin. That Rachmaninoff arranged it himself for solo piano.
he originally did it for voice, wrote it for voice. So that's the solo version, then there's a violin version, everyone plays it on different instruments. And same with this piece by Maurice Ravel. This is called Pièce en forme de habanera, piece in the form and the style of a habanera dance. And the habanera is a dance that was popular in Spain especially, but its origins are in Cuba, Havana, Cuba. It has an Afro-Cuban lilt to it. Here's the rhythm of the habanera. Georges Bizet's Carmen has a habanera in it. That's the rhythm. Da, 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 da. You know, the famous da, 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 da. Anyway, I don't sing, I say it. So Maurice Ravel, we think of him normally as a French composer at the same time, maybe a little later than Claude Debussy. But here's the funny thing about him. He loved Spanish themes in his music, probably because his mother tongue was Spanish. He was Gascon. Gascony is a region in between Spain and France near the Pyrenees. So he spoke Spanish growing up. And Ravel was a fascinating, maybe peculiar guy, was kind of a loner. I mean, he had good friends, but he was a very short, very small, diminutive guy. And you see photos, you see it's a very unique, very thin features, thin face, thin hands. And he loved cats very much. That already endears him even more to me, because I love cats. I have 2 kids and 2 cats, and they're all our children, I say. So he lived with many cats. And his music, is very cat-like. You'll see what I mean. So anyway, Ravel just creates these magic sounds. Here's an example. Influenced jazz a lot later. It's a glittering, I once had a dream about Ravel's music. This might not make sense, but I was in college at the time. I was playing some Ravel, and I had this dream. I grew up in New Jersey. I don't advertise that a lot, but around here. But New Jersey's fine. There's some people who will tell me, we don't need more of you here. But I said, look, my people are not. Anyway, so the point is, I had this dream. I was playing Ravel, and in my dream, I was driving late at night by a mall, because that's what New Jersey is famous for, malls. One of them. And the mall, it was winter in the dream, and there was nobody in the mall, but all the lights were on, and it was like all these chandeliers, and it was just a very glittery, that's the word that comes to me. That's Ravel for me. So, here's another story about this piece. This is a piano arrangement by a guy named Daniel Héricourt, French guy, obviously. I didn't bother to look up who he was. Stupid, I'm never going to do that again. Because I have the sheet music that says arranged, it's in French, it's like, arranged by Daniel Héricourt, 1920 something. Okay. I was playing this in Greensboro the other day, and a lady came up to me and said, "You're not going to believe this. Daniel Héricourt was my neighbor in Greensboro in the 80s and 90s in the Forest Hill neighborhood. We talked. His wife, I knew his wife. She lives at Wellspring, or maybe somewhere. And I nearly fainted, and so I said, well, okay, tell me about it. And she said, well, yeah, he was born in 1904 or something. He knew Debussy, he knew Ravel, he did some arrangements for Ravel. And sometime he came to America before the Second World War. And he ended up teaching at the UNC Greensboro. And then he retired. We were neighbors. So they walked their dog. I talked to him. So that's just, you have to always look up who you're playing. But I just thought that was, yeah. But so here's the Habanera by Ravel, arranged by Daniel Héricourt from Greensboro.
It's beautiful. It's not flashy, but it's sparkly, you know. So here's another French piece. This is a little longer. It's not that long, really. This is the first movement of César Franck's violin sonata, arranged by Alfred Cortot for solo piano. I'm sorry I didn't bring a violinist with me for this, but that's just, you know. I swore I would never learn this. I played this with a wonderful violinist, and, you know, but I decided I didn't want to let go of the piece, so I learned the solo version. Now, the Franck sonata is not to be confused with Frank Sinatra. It sounds an awful lot like that. I was confused the two, right? So, yeah, it's a dad joke. It's a corny joke. So the Franck, he wrote this in the late 19th century. This piece was very famous. So there's a story about it, that there's a fictional violin sonata in Marcel Proust in Swann's Way. And it's heavily symbolic in the plot. And many people think that that's based on the César Franck sonata, the real life. Probably is. I mean, you read Proust. Proust doesn't have a normal plot. You know, it's just flashbacks, memories. And same with this sonata. It doesn't really have I don't know, it's more like a stream of consciousness, especially this first movement here. And it's only, the reason I'm only doing the first movement is I haven't learned the rest yet. It's tricky. So, yeah, César Franck, violin sonata, first movement. And it's French, but you know, Ravel is early 20th century there. This is going back in time. I'm not necessarily going in chronological order. This is from the late 1800s, and you know, so.
interesting life story. His father tried to create a second Mozart out of him, and it didn't really work. He sort of ran away from that and was, for most of his life, an organist in Paris. And he started writing these masterpieces like that in his late years, 70s, but when he was older. So it's like the opposite of Mozart. He was like the opposite of Mozart. He was not a child prodigy. He was a later bloomer. Sometimes good things take time, So let's try something a little fun for a second here.
So this door slams, so before you start,
Oh, yeah.
just close it.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Very dramatic. Maybe I'll include that in this next thing. I'm telling you. So I'm going to improvise something for you, but I need your help. This classical players usually improvise. I read this and I thought, well, why not bring it back a little bit? It's fun. It can be scary for me, but it's. So I need maybe 3 or 4 notes from you, random notes, and also a mood or character that you'd like this piece to be. So give me a note, please. Any note. Musical note. Any. Anybody? G. Okay, so we have a G. And then something else?
C.
G, and then C. How about 1 or 2 more? You can use flats and sharps too.
C sharp.
Okay. How about 1 more? Last one. A, G, C sharp, A. Okay. And what character do we want for this? Anybody? You want to have a title to it? No?
Frivolous.
Frivolous, okay. I like that. All right, so. So I'll do another gospel tune. This is another old gospel tune called I Have Heard of a Land. I'm going to do a little improv on it as well. So. gospel piece that's truly, truly crazy, you could say. This is a work by Paganini for violin. It's Paganini's 24th Caprice for solo violin, arranged for piano by Franz Liszt. So I'll tell you a little bit about both of them. The last time I was here, I did maybe one or two others from this set of Liszt's Paganini arrangements. But this is the sixth and final of Liszt's pieces based on Paganini. So Paganini was this wild man-like violinist in the early 1800s, late 1700s. People thought he was possessed because the way he played the violin, even the way he looked, was just, it was shocking at the time, especially. Remember that first piece I played, the Gossek? Imagine some, wild, long-haired, crazy violinist coming into that world. It was a shock. But it was the Romantics who idolized Paganini and also Beethoven, because those two especially, they stood for free spirit, free-spirited expression in music and the arts, etc. Even the lifestyle, they were like rock stars. So, Liszt was in Paris in the 1830s. He was a young man. He was quite distraught with things. He was teaching a lot of private lessons and was kind of stuck in his life. But he heard Paganini perform, and the rest is history, because Liszt, locked himself up at home to practice like crazy, like hours and hours for a few years. And he reinvented himself and became Franz Liszt. And it's in large part due to Paganini's influence. So this is a piece from that period. Now I have to say, I'm playing an altered version of Liszt's. So it's complicated. The original piece is Paganini. Liszt did an arrangement in the 1830s. Then Liszt revised it in the 1850s. And then in the early 20th century or so, maybe late 1800s, an Italian pianist-composer named Ferruccio Busoni made his own version of the Liszt. So that's what I'm doing. It's so many people and versions. But here's the thing. In the old days, in classical music, they were less purist about it. Nowadays, we might get shocked at it. But so what I mean is, Mahler, for example, when he conducted Mozart, he would rewrite the symphonies for orchestra. He would put different instruments than what Mozart. He would rearrange them. I think it's fascinating. I think it's great to hear that and also to hear the original. But there's a lot of folks who say, no, that's sacrilege. Sacrilegious. You can't mess with the music like that. But I think it's interesting. So here is the Busoni version of Liszt's version of Paganini. It's a familiar theme and variation. You've probably heard it before. So that's the basis for it. So.
Thank you. I'll close with another fireworky piece. This is gospel. I'm going to do a little medley of When the Saints Go Marching In and I'll Fly Away with a segue. Yeah.
My question, I enjoyed all of the music, but when I hear the gospel, it sounds like you've got blues in there,
A little bit.
and you're ready to start swinging.
Well, that's the thing. One of my favorite gospel musicians ever is Mahalia Jackson. And I'll tell you about, so I mentioned that name somewhere, not anywhere around here. And some guy started laughing hysterically in the back. And I got sort of upset. I didn't show it, but I went in the car and it hit me. He thought I said Michael Jackson. That's probably what it was. It's not Mahalia Jackson. And she would do that because she's from New Orleans, moved up to Chicago, and you think of the gospel music developing there. It has an intersection with blues. It's not the same as the blues, really. It's not, but it has some of those things to it. Yeah, definitely. So you'll hear some of that here too. Yeah, maybe a lot. So. But I think people like Mahalia Jackson, they would say, no, we did it in the church first, and they did it later. That's like, here's the thing. I've done some gospel, someone will say, oh, that's boogie woogie. Well, people like, let's say Jerry Lee Lewis who played, he said, no, that's from the church. It just, they took it out and later and they turned it in, that they called it boogie woogie. So it's all, even in Bach's time, Ein feste Burg is, a mighty fortress is our God. That is a popular student song. I think it was even a drinking song at the time, which is just, but Martin Luther found that melody and he slowed it down a bit, maybe changed it a little, and he turned it into this great hymn. So, I'm not saying it's the same, but there's a overlap. Maybe because sacred and secular do overlap to some degree. So, anyway, here is what I'm going to do with these two old gospel tunes. So. Well, oh boy, I may have overstayed my welcome. Thank you very much for having me, and if you liked it, please tell Ms. Becky and Lori, I'd love to come back and do some more, because it's been a real pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much. If you want to stay in touch, if you write your email, I have a book. I'll leave it out, so just optional, you know.